I'm Jake Colburn. Every Saturday for 2 years, I joked. No one marries a guy with triplets. Cora, the waitress, always smiled. Then she whispered, I already do. I froze. I'd barely spoken to her in 18 months. That whisper revealed she wasn't just a waitress. She was the anonymous angel who'd been holding my family together. I'm a contractor in a small Utah town. After my wife passed, I was left raising triplet boys on my own, 3 newborns and a grief so heavy I didn't think I'd ever breathe normally again. The Sagebrush Diner became my Saturday ritual, the 1 hour a week I wasn't outnumbered by sippy cups and sleepless nights. Cora worked the corner booth, always there with a coffee refill, always quiet. I'd toss out that same tired joke about being unmarriable, and she'd smile, soft, private, the kind you dismiss. What I didn't know was that behind that smile, she had already been stitching my fractured family back together for months. The question was, who was she really and why had she chosen us? The accident that took my wife happened on a Tuesday, March 17, 2018. She was driving home from her night shift at the hospital, a route she'd driven 1,000 times, a stretch of Interstate 15 just south of town near the Beaver Creek exit. A semi crossed the median. They said she didn't suffer. The boys were 8 months old. Suddenly, I was a 32-year-old widower with 3 high chairs, no sleep, and a silence in the house so loud I'd turn on every radio just to drown it out. For 2 years, I moved through the motions. I ran my contracting business with one hand while pushing a triple stroller with the other. People in town were kind, casseroles appeared, church groups offered help. But after a few months, the meals stopped and the phone calls faded. That's life. People move on. A widower with triplets becomes a familiar piece of the scenery, something people nod at sympathetically but don't quite know how to deal with. I started going to the Sagebrush Diner every Saturday morning at 7 because it was the only hour all week when I wasn't outnumbered in my own house. My sister would come over, bless her, and I'd sit in that worn vinyl booth and pretend I was just a regular guy having coffee. Cora started working there about 18 months ago. She was early 30s, dark hair always pulled back, the kind of quiet that makes you forget someone's in the room. She'd refill my cup without asking, slide the check face down, say 3 words if she said any at all. I'd make the same joke to whoever would listen. No one marries a guy with triplets. It was armor. If I said it first, no one else had to. Cora would give me that small, private smile, nothing flirtatious, just knowing. I thought nothing of it. Then last Saturday, as I was pulling out my wallet, she leaned close and whispered, I already do. I froze. Those 3 words rearranged everything. I looked at her, really looked, and saw something in her eyes I'd missed for a year and a half. Familiarity. Not the familiarity of a waitress who knows her regulars' order. The familiarity of someone who'd been paying very close attention. When I asked what she meant, she just straightened up and said, think about it. Then she walked to the kitchen and left me standing there holding a $10 bill. I drove home in a fog. The boys were down for their nap when I started going through things. There was the stack of freezer meals that had shown up on my porch the winter all 3 boys caught RSV. I'd never found out who left them. Lasagna, chicken soup, casseroles in disposable pans, always with a handwritten note. From someone who's been where you are. I'd assumed it was a church group. Then there were the birthday cards. For 2 years, every birthday, mine, the boys, a card would arrive with no return address signed someone who thinks you're brave. I'd kept them in my nightstand drawer because they were the only acknowledgement that my struggle was visible to someone. I started asking around. My sister knew nothing. The diner owner, an old guy named Marty, said Cora was private. Keeps to herself, he said. Reliable, never misses a shift. Only thing I know is she lost her family a long time ago. Don't know details. That word lost settled into my chest. I found her address through a county record. An apartment on the edge of town above a used bookstore. I drove by twice, didn't knock. I wasn't sure what I'd say. Then yesterday I went back to the diner. It was a Wednesday. Cora was working the counter, and when she saw me, her expression shifted, surprise, then something guarded. I sat in my usual booth and waited until the lunch crowd thinned. When she came over with the coffee pot, I said, "It was you." The meals, the cards. She didn't deny it. She set the pot down, slid into the booth across from me, and for the first time I saw her mask crack. "I know what it's like to lose everything," she said. 10 years ago, my husband and our infant daughter were killed on Interstate 15, same stretch you pass every day, the same exit. I was in the car behind them. I saw it happen. The air left my lungs. I stared at her, and suddenly every small kindness made terrible, beautiful sense. She wasn't just a waitress. She was a mirror. A woman who'd been carrying the same weight of grief for a decade and who'd chosen my family as the place to pour her unspent love. Before I could respond, she slid out of the booth and said, "There's more, but not here. Come by my apartment tonight, 7 o'clock. I'll explain everything." Then she was gone, and I was left with a coffee pot, a pounding heart, and a question I couldn't shake. If she'd been in the car behind her own family, what had she seen? And what did she mean by everything? I knocked on her door at exactly 7 o'clock. The apartment above the bookstore smelled of old paper and lavender, and when Cora opened it, she was wearing a simple gray sweater with the sleeves pushed up, no waitress uniform, no polite smile, just her. She looked at me like she was bracing for impact. "Come in," she said, and stepped aside. The apartment was small. A worn couch, a shelf packed with books, a kitchenette with a single coffee mug drying on the rack. But my eyes went straight to the photographs on the mantel. A man with kind eyes and a crooked grin holding a baby girl with a tuft of dark hair. The same man standing beside a woman, Cora, younger, smiling in a way I'd never seen her smile. Next to that, a newspaper clipping, yellowed and fragile. I pointed. "That them," she nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's David, and that's Lily." She was 11 months old. She lifted the frame, tracing the glass with her thumb. We were driving back from my parents' house in Salt Lake. It was a Sunday afternoon, clear skies. David was driving our sedan, Lily strapped in the back. I was in my sister's car, a quarter-mile behind. We'd left a few minutes later because the baby bag was missing. She set the frame down, but her hand stayed on it. I saw the semi lose control. I saw it cross the median and crush their car against the barrier. There was nothing left. I didn't interrupt. I knew what it cost her to say that out loud. She turned to face me, and her eyes were dry but burning. The police report said the driver fell asleep. The company, Davis Freight, settled with us quietly. They paid out enough that I could bury my family and never have to work again. Except I couldn't sit still. I started digging. She walked to a small desk in the corner and pulled out a thick folder, dropping it onto the coffee table. Newspaper articles, court filings, driver logs, handwritten notes. I sat on the edge of the couch and started leafing through. "Davis Freight has a pattern," she said. "They push their drivers to ignore federal rest regulations. The driver who hit my family had been on the road for 21 hours straight. I found other cases. At least 4 serious accidents in 5 years, all with the same explanation: driver fatigue. And every time the company quietly settles before anyone can build a class action." Then she pulled out a single sheet of paper, a coroner's report with a familiar date. "March 17th, 2018. I went cold." "Your wife's accident," Cora said, her voice now very calm. "It was a Davis truck too. Same stretch of highway, same exit. The driver tested negative for drugs and alcohol, but his logbook was clean. Too clean. Investigators flagged it for inconsistencies, but the case was closed after the insurance payout." I stared at the paper. My wife's name, Helen Colburn, printed in clinical font. The details I'd tried to forget: the cause of death, the time of impact. My hands started shaking. Cora sat down next to me on the couch, a careful distance away. "I found your story in the local paper a few months after the funeral. Widower with triplets, same exit, same company. I felt something crack open. I didn't know if it was obsession or guilt or just loneliness, but I started watching. I'd drive by your house, see you struggling with those 3 car seats, and something in me just decided." "Decided what?" My voice came out rougher than I intended. "That I couldn't save my own family, but maybe I could help you keep yours. So I got a job at the diner. I knew you came in every Saturday. I learned your routine. I left the meals when the boys got sick because I remembered what RSV felt like with Lily. The cards, those were harder. Every time I wrote 'someone who thinks you're brave,' I was really writing it to myself." I looked at her, this woman who had been grieving alone for a decade, who had inserted herself into my life not as a predatory thing, but as a lifeline. I thought about all those Saturday mornings when I'd made that stupid joke and she'd smiled. Now I understood the smile. It was the smile of someone who knew the punchline before I did. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" I asked. She looked down at her hands. "Because how do you start that conversation? Hey, your wife died the same way my husband did, and I think the same company is responsible. Also, I've been stalking your porch with casseroles." You'd have thought I was insane, and maybe I was. A.M. I reached over and took her hand. She flinched, then relaxed. "You're not insane," I said. "You're the only person who's told me the truth in 2 years." That broke something. She started crying, not the polite tears of a waitress, but the ugly, gasping sobs of someone who'd been holding a dam shut for a decade. I pulled her into me and held on. I didn't say it was okay because it wasn't. I just held on. When she'd calmed down, she pulled back and wiped her face. "There's more," she said. "The reason I asked you here tonight isn't just to confess. It's because I've finally got evidence that could force a criminal investigation into Davis Freight. A former driver named Pete Mallory who got fired after he refused to fudge his logs. He recorded conversations with his dispatcher, telling him to drive sick, to skip sleep, to ignore the electronic limits. He's willing to testify, but he's scared, and he's in town until Friday." She pulled a small digital recorder from the folder. "Have copies. It's enough to reopen both cases, but I can't do it alone. If we go public, Davis will bury us in legal fees, smear my character, come after your contracting business, maybe even use your boys against you. I need you to know what you're walking into." I didn't hesitate. "They killed my wife. They killed your husband and your daughter. If there's a chance to make sure it never happens again, I'm in." I squeezed her hand. "But I'm not risking my boys. We need a plan that protects them." She nodded, relief flooding her face. "I have one. My sister lives in St. George. She'll take the boys for a few weeks, no questions asked. We stay here, we work with the state police and a reporter I trust at the Salt Lake Tribune. We go public tomorrow." Tomorrow. The word hit me like a truck. After 2 years of silence, suddenly we were racing against a clock. I looked at the mantel, at the photograph of her husband and child, and then I thought of the birthday cards in my nightstand drawer, signed by someone who'd been telling me I was brave long before I believed it. I stood up. "Okay, let's do it." That night I went home and packed a bag for the boys. My sister, Annie, didn't ask too many questions when I called. She just said she'd take them as long as needed. I kissed their foreheads while they slept, those three identical faces that were the only reason I'd kept breathing after Helen died. And now I was about to invite chaos into our lives, but I knew Helen would have wanted me to fight. The next morning I met Cora at the diner before opening. Marty, the owner, was already there, flipping chairs off tables. When he saw us together, his expression shifted from surprise to something heavier. He'd known Cora's story, I realized. He'd probably given her the job knowing exactly why she wanted it. Marty walked over. "You two figure things out," Cora nodded. "We're going after Davis Freight." Marty let out a long breath. "Lord, you know Bill Davis is on the town council. He's got friends everywhere. Sheriff's office, the bank, even the judge." "We know," I said. "That's why we're not starting local." We drove to Salt Lake that afternoon. Cora's contact at the Tribune, a woman named Evelyn Cross, met us in a park near the Capitol building. She was in her 50s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense way of speaking. She'd been covering trucking safety issues for years and had a personal grudge against Davis Freight after they'd sued her paper for defamation, and lost. Evelyn listened to the recordings on a bench, her face growing darker by the minute. When the final clip ended, a dispatcher shouting at Pete to quit whining and drive the damn load, she closed the recorder and looked at us. "This is a bomb," she said, "but it's not enough on its own. We need Pete on the record, on camera with his face. We need the logbook discrepancies from the Colburn and Lawson cases. We need a prosecutor willing to take a swing at a big fish. That means federal, not county." Cora and I exchanged a glance. That was a bigger fight than we'd planned. "Can you get us an appointment with the U.S. Attorney's office?" I asked. "I can try, but you'll need to be ready for what comes next. Once this goes public, Davis will treat you like enemy number one. He's ruined people for less. There are stories I've heard, threats, property damage, even a suspicious barn fire 2 years back that no one could ever prove." A chill ran down my spine. The boys were safe, but Cora and I were targets now. We stayed in Salt Lake that night at a cheap motel. Two separate rooms, but neither of us slept. Around midnight, I heard a soft knock on my door. Cora stood in the hallway, wrapped in a blanket. "I can't stop thinking about Lily," she said. "If we fail, it'll all have been for nothing." I opened the door wider and let her come sit on the edge of the bed. We talked until 3 in the morning about her marriage, about David's terrible jokes, about the way Lily used to laugh at the vacuum cleaner. I told her about Helen, how she'd stayed awake through triple feedings with a smile on her face, how she'd always hummed the same lullaby off-key. By the time the sun came up, something had shifted. It wasn't romantic yet. It was too raw for that. But it was the beginning of trust. The beginning of two broken people seeing each other whole. We drove back to town on Thursday morning, ready to meet Pete Mallory and get his sworn statement. But when we pulled up to his motel, there were two squad cars out front, no lights, just sitting there. And standing on the sidewalk, hands in his pockets, was Bill Davis himself, a man I'd seen at town council meetings, always smiling, always shaking hands. He spotted our truck and walked toward us. His smile was still in place, but his eyes were cold. "Mr. Colburn," he said. "Miss Lawson, I think we need to have a conversation about what you're digging into, before anyone gets hurt." I felt Cora tense beside me. My phone buzzed. A text from my sister. "Jake, someone's been driving past the house. Slow, twice now. Should I call the police?" I showed the screen to Cora. Her face went pale. Bill Davis didn't blink. "Like I said," he repeated, "before anyone gets hurt." I stood on that sidewalk, the early sun hot on my neck, staring into the face of the man who had probably killed my wife. Bill Davis looked like a grandfather who just offered you a hard candy, soft jowls, pressed shirt, hands that had never done manual labor, but his eyes were dead. "Are you threatening my family?" I asked. My voice was steady. Inside, I was boiling. Davis spread his hands, the picture of innocence. "Just friendly advice. Small towns have long memories. People who stir up trouble tend to find trouble follows them home." He glanced at Cora. "Especially people with nothing left to lose." Cora stepped forward. I'd never seen her like this, fear replaced by fury. "You already took everything from me, Bill, my husband, my daughter. There's nothing you can threaten me with that I haven't already survived." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe even a hint of respect. Then the mask slid back. "I don't know what you're talking about. Accidents happen. That's why we have insurance." "Insurance doesn't fudge logbooks," I said. "Insurance doesn't cover a pattern of driver exhaustion and a cover-up that spans 5 years. Davis's smile thinned. "You've been listening to disgruntled ex-employees. Pete Mallory is a drunk who got fired for cause. Anything he told you is fantasy." "Then you won't mind if we take it to the U.S. Attorney's office," Cora said. "Let them decide what's fantasy." The silence stretched. Davis looked at us for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Fair enough. But remember, Mr. Colburn, you have 3 little boys. It would be a shame if something happened to your sister's house while they were visiting." He turned and walked back to his car, a black Escalade with tinted windows. As it pulled away, I realized my fists were clenched so hard my nails had cut into my palms. Cora touched my arm. "We need to get Pete out of here. Now." We rushed into the motel. Pete's room was on the ground floor, number 14. The door was ajar. Inside, the room was trashed, mattress flipped, drawers pulled out, his duffel bag empty on the floor. Pete was sitting on the edge of the bathtub, head in his hands, shaking. He looked up when we came in. His face was bruised, a cut above his eye still bleeding. "They told me to disappear," he said, voice cracking. "2 guys in masks, said if I talked to anyone, they'd come back for my daughter. She's 8 years old." Cora knelt in front of him. "Pete, listen to me. If you run, they win. We can protect your daughter. We have people, a reporter, a federal contact. We'll get her somewhere safe tonight, but we need your testimony. Without it, Davis keeps killing people." Pete's eyes darted between us. "How do I know you're not working for him too?" I pulled out my phone and showed him a photo of my boys. "Because that man threatened my children 20 seconds ago. Because his company's truck killed my wife. I've got just as much to lose as you do." He stared at the photo, then at me. Something in his expression shifted from fear to a grim kind of resolve. "You swear you can protect my little girl?" "I swear," Cora said. "I know what it's like to lose a child. I won't let it happen to you." Pete took a ragged breath and nodded. "Okay, there's more than just the recordings. I have copies of dispatch emails, ones that explicitly tell drivers to manage their logs creatively. And I know where the company keeps the original, unedited driver logs, not the ones they show inspectors. The real ones, in a safe at their depot outside of town. My heart pounded. You're saying there's a physical document that proves every violation, everyone for the last 7 years. I used to be a supervisor before I got demoted to driving. I saw them change numbers myself. He pulled a key from his pocket, one of those small safe deposit keys. This opens the safe, but it's at the depot and the place is guarded. Cora took the key. We'll figure it out. First, let's get you and your daughter somewhere safe. I'll call Evelyn. Within an hour, Evelyn Cross had arranged for Pete and his daughter to be driven to a secure location in Idaho, out of Davis's reach. She had a network of journalists who dealt with corporate intimidation before. Pete gave his sworn statement on video before he left, all 2 hours of it, detailing every instance of log falsification, every driver pressured to skip sleep, every accident that got buried. That night, Cora and I sat in her apartment, the folder of evidence spread across the coffee table. My phone buzzed again. Annie, this time with a photo attached. A car I didn't recognize parked across the street from her house, lights off. I called her immediately. Take the boys and go to the neighbor's house. Call the police. I'll be there as soon as I can. Annie's voice was tight with fear. Jake, what have you gotten into? I'll explain everything. Just keep them safe. I hung up and looked at Cora. Davis isn't waiting, he's moving now. She was already pulling on her coat. Then we need to move faster. The original logs are at the depot. If we can get those before morning, we can hand everything to the U.S. attorney by noon. That's insane. The depot has security cameras, guards. We'd be walking into a trap. Cora's eyes were fierce. Not if we have help. Marty used to work at that depot. He knows the layout, the shift changes, and he hates Davis as much as we do. We drove to Marty's place that night. The old man listened in silence, then slowly pulled on his boots. I swore I'd never set foot in that place again, but some things are worth breaking a promise for. The depot was on the industrial edge of town, a fenced lot with a single guard shack and rows of parked trucks. Marty knew the guard on duty, a young guy named Travis who'd been fired by Davis for questioning a maintenance issue. Travis let us in through a back gate and pointed to the main office. The safe is in the manager's office behind the filing cabinet. The cameras loop on a 90-second cycle. You've got from 2:15 to 2:18 in the morning. That's when the guard station monitor resets. Cora and I slipped inside while Marty kept watch. The office smelled of stale coffee and diesel. The filing cabinet was heavy but moved easily enough on its rollers. Behind it, a small wall safe exactly where Pete said it would be. I used the key. The safe clicked open. Inside, 3 thick binders. The original driver logs, with times and mileage that didn't match any official filing. Beside them, a flash drive. I grabbed everything, and we were out the gate before the next camera cycle started. We drove straight to Evelyn's hotel room in Salt Lake. She was waiting with a forensic accountant and a former federal investigator she'd called in favors to summon. By dawn, they had confirmed what we already knew. The binders contained evidence of over 400 falsified log entries across 7 years, directly linked to at least 6 serious accidents, including the ones that killed Helen and the Lawsons. The flash drive held emails from Davis himself, ordering dispatchers to keep trucks moving no matter what. Evelyn looked up from the documents, her face grim. This is enough for a federal indictment. But it's also enough to make you both targets until it's public. Once we publish, Davis loses his leverage. He can't hurt you without proving his own guilt. So we publish now, I said. There's one problem. The U.S. Attorney's Office can move faster if we give them a heads up, an hour's notice. But if Davis catches wind, he might try to destroy the depot evidence or run. Cora looked at me. We both knew what we had to do. We give him the hour, she said. We go back to town, confront him directly, and make sure he knows we're not backing down. That will keep him focused on us, not on destroying evidence. It was a terrible plan, possibly suicidal, but if it bought the feds enough time, it was worth it. I texted Annie. If you don't hear from me by tonight, call the Salt Lake Tribune and ask for Evelyn Cross. She'll handle everything. Then I turned to Cora. You don't have to come. This is my fight now. She took my hand, and for the first time since her confession at the diner, her smile was real. It stopped being just your fight the day I left that first casserole on your porch, she squeezed. We do this together, like we should have from the start. We drove back toward town as the sun rose, the binders of damning evidence packed safely with Evelyn and already being scanned. In the truck, with the Utah desert stretching around us, I felt a strange peace. Whatever happened next, I was no longer just a grieving widower making tired jokes in a diner booth. I was a man fighting for his family, for all the families Davis had destroyed. Cora reached over and rested her hand on my shoulder. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for believing me, for believing in this." I kept my eyes on the road. Ahead, the town limits sign came into view, and beyond it, the first glimpse of the Davis Freight headquarters, a concrete box of a building with the company logo painted on the side. Somewhere inside, Bill Davis was probably already preparing his next move. I tightened my grip on the wheel. "Let's finish this." The Davis Freight headquarters sat on a flat stretch of asphalt just outside town, a squat concrete building with a fleet lot behind it. When we pulled into the parking lot, a single light was on in the corner office on the second floor. Bill Davis was waiting. Cora and I walked through the front doors. No receptionist, no security, just a long hallway with industrial carpet and the faint smell of diesel. At the end, a door stood open. Davis sat behind a desk with a glass of whiskey and a file folder open in front of him. He didn't look surprised to see us. "I was wondering how long you'd take," he said. He gestured to two chairs across from him. "Sit." We didn't sit. Cora placed both hands on the edge of his desk and leaned forward. "It's over, Bill. The original logs, your emails, Pete Mallory's testimony, it's all with the U.S. attorney. They're executing a search warrant on this building in approximately 45 minutes. Davis's expression didn't change, but his hand tightened around the glass. "You're bluffing. Try me." She slid her phone across the desk, a photo of the binders and flash drive on the screen. "Every falsified record from the last 7 years, every driver you pushed past the breaking point, every accident you buried, it's all public now." For the first time, the mask cracked. Davis's jaw clenched and a vein pulsed in his temple. "You think this will bring them back? Your precious husband, your baby girl." He stood up, voice rising. "You think a courtroom can undo what happened on that highway? Nothing changes. My company will pay a fine, maybe I'll do a few months in a white-collar prison and then I'll come back and rebuild. But you'll still be alone, Miss Lawson. And you," he turned to me, "you'll still be a widower with 3 kids nobody wants." I stepped closer and I saw him flinch. He might have had money and lawyers, but he was an old man who'd never thrown a punch in his life, and I was someone who'd spent years hauling lumber and swinging hammers. "You're wrong," I said. "Because the one thing you've never understood is that people aren't numbers on a spreadsheet. Every driver you pushed, every family you shattered, they built a case against you, one brick at a time. You're not going to rebuild. You're going to be remembered as the man who killed people to save a few bucks on shipping." Davis opened his mouth to reply, but a sound cut through the building, the heavy thump of helicopter blades. Through the window, I saw a black helicopter bearing the FBI insignia descending onto the lot. Blue and red lights flashed at the entrance gate as 7 unmarked vehicles poured through. Davis lunged for the file folder on his desk, but I was faster. I grabbed it and tossed it to Cora, who stepped back into the hallway. "Looking for these, the duplicate records you kept for blackmail. Evelyn already has copies. These are just souvenirs." FBI agents in tactical gear filled the hallway. A woman in a suit, the lead agent, entered the office and placed Davis in handcuffs. He didn't resist. He just stared at us with a cold, hollow fury as they let him out. The man who had destroyed so many lives was finally just a tired old man in a wrinkled shirt, heading to a place where his money and name wouldn't protect him. I don't remember much of the next few hours. There were statements to give, evidence to catalog, reporters to dodge. Evelyn's story broke at noon, and by evening it was national news. Davis Freight's stock collapsed. The company's board fired the entire executive team within the week. The families of every victim were contacted and offered a settlement from the frozen assets, real compensation this time, not hush money. But the real reckoning happened at the town council meeting 2 weeks later. The room was packed with people who'd worked for Davis, people who'd lost loved ones, and people who'd kept quiet for years out of fear. One by one, they stood up to speak. A dispatcher who'd been forced to alter records, a widow whose son had died in an accident the company blamed on weather, a mechanic who'd reported faulty brakes and been ignored. The stories spilled out like water from a cracked dam. Cora sat beside me in the front row, holding my hand. When her turn came to speak, she walked to the podium with the same quiet dignity she'd had the first time I saw her refill a coffee cup. She didn't cry. She just told the story of David and Lily, and how a decade of silence had finally been broken. Afterward, the town didn't celebrate. There were no parties, no triumphant speeches. Instead, there was a heavy, exhausted relief. The kind that comes when a poison is finally drained from a wound and the healing can begin. People who'd avoided eye contact in the grocery store for years suddenly stopped to talk. Neighbors who'd taken sides now stood together. The scar Davis had cut through the community didn't vanish overnight, but it started to close. For me, the hardest part came unexpectedly, 3 days after the town meeting. The state police called to say they'd formally reopened Helen's case and reclassified it. The official cause was no longer accident caused by unknown circumstances. It was vehicular negligence resulting in death with deliberate corporate concealment. A small, bureaucratic change. But when I heard it, I pulled my truck to the side of the road and wept until my ribs ached. For 2 years, I'd believed my wife's death was random, meaningless, a cruel twist of fate. Learning it was preventable, that a man in an office had traded her life for profit, brought a fresh wave of grief. But it also brought a strange gift, the knowledge that her death mattered. That by fighting back, we'd given it meaning. Cora was there when I got home. She'd moved into my house temporarily. We both needed to feel safe, to not be alone. She didn't say anything when she saw my face. She just pulled me inside, made me a cup of coffee, and sat with me at the kitchen table while the boys played in the living room. After a long silence, I said, "I don't know how to thank you. You gave me back the truth. You gave my boys a future where they know their mother's life wasn't thrown away." Looked at her coffee. "You gave me something too. For 10 years, I couldn't look at a family without feeling like I'd failed mine. I thought if I just stayed invisible, just poured coffee and left casseroles, maybe I could atone without anyone knowing. But you saw me. You didn't run when you found out what I'd been doing. You believed me." I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. "Cora, you whisper that you already do, and I still can't get those words out of my head. What did you mean?" She smiled, that same private smile from the diner booth, but now it was tinged with something more open. "I meant that I'd already made a promise to your family, even if you didn't know it. I promised myself I'd make sure those 3 boys grew up knowing someone was watching over them. I promised I'd be the person they could count on, even if it was from a distance. And somewhere along the way, I promised my heart to you, even though I never expected you to want it." I stood up, walked around the table, and pulled her to her feet. "I want it," I said. "I don't know how this works or when it starts or if I'm ready. But I know that the only person I want next to me, in every Saturday morning and every sleepless night from now on, is you." She kissed me then. Not the careful kiss of 2 people testing the water, but the firm, certain kiss of someone who'd already been choosing me for 18 months and was finally being seen. We married 6 months later in a small ceremony at the Sagebrush Diner. Marty closed the place for the day, pushed the tables together, and decorated with crepe paper and wildflowers from the field behind my house. My boys, now 3 years old, served as ring bearers, though they mostly threw the rings at each other and giggled. Father Thomas from the parish up the road officiated, and the town showed up in force. Even the people who'd once whispered about Davis now came to cheer for us. When the time came for vows, I looked at Cora, the quiet waitress who'd been leaving meals on my porch, sending cards, and watching over my family without ever asking for recognition. And I said the words I'd once turned into a joke. "No one marries a guy with triplets, except you. You did. You already had long before I knew." She laughed through tears and said, "I do, again." And then, because the story doesn't end without one more quiet whisper, she leaned close as everyone clapped and said into my ear, I also signed those birthday cards as someone who thinks you're brave because I was speaking to myself too. You taught me that maybe I was brave enough to start over. I pulled back, looked into her eyes, and realized the real confession had never been hers. It had been the universe's, quietly arranging two broken lives on the same stretch of grief, waiting for the moment when a joke would become a vow. What do we do with a love that arrives not with fireworks, but with freezer meals left on a porch in the dark? What do we call a woman who chooses you 18 months before you even know her name? Cora hadn't been waiting for me to notice. She'd been keeping a quiet promise to a family she'd never met, because she understood a truth most of us learn too late. The people who hold us together are often invisible. They're the ones who show up without being asked, who remember birthdays when the world forgets, who stitch up what's frayed without ever expecting thanks. Her confession at that diner booth wasn't a romantic overture. It was the moment an unseen architecture of care finally became visible. The stretch of Interstate 15 where both our families were shattered is still there. The exit sign for Beaver Creek hasn't moved. Every time I drive past it now, with Cora beside me and the boys in the back, I feel the echo of what was lost, but also something else. The defiant knowledge that what was broken can be rebuilt. Not the same, never the same, but still standing. It took a quiet waitress and a worn-out joke to turn a place of grief into a place of starting over. So here's the question this story leaves behind. Who is the Cora in your life? Who has been choosing you without your knowledge, leaving meals, sending cards, showing up in small ways that you've been too busy or too heartbroken to notice? And maybe more importantly, who could you be that for someone else? If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear that they're not as alone as they think. Subscribe for more real stories of ordinary people who changed everything. And the next time you're at a diner, take a second look at the quiet person in the corner booth. They might be holding your whole future in a coffee pot.